Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2022 International Pediatric Feeding Disorder Conference and attending the Family Advisory Council's concurrent session, PDF Impacts on the Family Beyond Mealtime. I'm Brent Perry, current chair of the Feeding Matters Family Advisory Council, FAC for short. And today we're going to have an opportunity to hear from members of the Feeding Matters Family Advisory Council on a variety of topics that impact families outside of the course of care when we're with healthcare professionals. Now, the FAC consists of caregivers of children with pediatric feeding disorder, and we advise Feeding Matters and the PFD Alliance on how to best meet the needs of families, of those involved with the kids with pediatric feeding disorder. And it's been a real pleasure to be part of this team and Feeding Matters. So we're very thankful for the opportunity to be here with you today. Let me introduce the team that you're going to hear from today. We're fortunate to have all members of the Feeding Matters Family Advisory Council: Alba Chester, Amber Ramirez, Monica Davis, and Emily Adams. Now, before we get into the content of this presentation, I need to cover a little bit of the basics and the disclosures. So for myself, I do not have at present or have not had within the last 24 months any financial relationships with ineligible companies. I have nothing to disclose financially. And on the non-financial disclosures, chair of the FAC, volunteer with Feeding Matters, and I'm a parent of 3 children, 2 of which have PFD. For Monica Davis, she does not have any financial disclosures to make either. A non-financial disclosure, she is a parent of a child with pediatric feeding disorder, and she is a volunteer with Feeding Matters, the Power of 2 program, and a member of the FAC. Amber Ramirez does not have any disclosures to make financially within the last 24 months for any ineligible companies. And Amber is also a volunteer with FAC and the Power of 2 program at Feeding Matters, and a parent of a child with PFD. Alba Chester does not have any financial disclosures to make for relationships with ineligible companies. She is also a volunteer with Feeding Matters and the FAC, and a parent to 3 children with PFD. And our final presenter of the day will be Emily Adams. She does not have any financial disclosures to make either. On the non-financial disclosure side, she is a parent of a child with PFD, is involved with a nationwide children's intensive feeding parent mentor program, is a volunteer with the Feeding Matters Family Advisory Council, Power of 2 program, and sits on the Feeding Matters Board of Directors. Today's topics, we're going to hear from the FAC team about the impacts in school, with siblings, travel and vacation, changes in the course of care, and insurance impacts, all in the family that happen every day, and maybe as providers, not everybody sees and is exposed to. So we hope we can give you a glimpse of what else may impact families on a daily basis. So with that, I'd invite you to welcome Alba Chester.
Thank you, Brent. My name is Alba Chester, and I am a mother of 3 children with PFDs. My oldest son, Jake, is a freshman in college. Dylan is a 10th grader, and my youngest son, Luke, is an 8th grader. All my children deal with PFDs since they were babies. And between the 3 of them, we deal with various forms, including food allergies, FPIES, which is food protein-induced enterocolitis. 2 of my children have eosinophilic esophagitis, and also one has autism spectrum disorder. Each of my children is unique, and the severity of their PFD is very different, and how they impact their daily lives is very different. My experience with school and activities is obviously long. From preschool all the way to college, one of the biggest challenges children with PFD deal with is food in their school day. Our schools and extracurricular activities circle so much around food that it is impossible to have a week where you do not have an activity, an event, or even a school project without food involved. But not only that, children have feeding tubes also have additional challenges, potentially needing tube feeds during the day. In addition, children with PFD could have school absences due to doctors and therapy appointments and or just being ill due to their PFDs. Schools need to accommodate all of these to ensure that our children have equal access to education. All of these challenges at school and extracurricular activities are managed by families and add a layer of stress to already stressful lives. Children can receive school-based supports via Section 504 plans, individual education plans, or individual health plans. Here's a chart that explains a little bit about the difference between what an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, versus a 504 plan. These are the two most commonly used. As you can see, the IEP is something that is managed with special education versus the 504, which is really intended to be more wide range of disabilities who are nonetheless are able to participate and succeed in the general education classroom, versus the IEP, on the other hand, is intended for children who are not able to learn at the same pace as their peers and who require special education. We deal with all three of these, and assuming that there's no learning difficulties, we have found that the 504 plan is the most helpful for most families. Here's a little bit of a background from the U.S. Department of Education for Civil Rights, December 2016 guide, where it explains a little bit what a Section 504 plan. And like I explained, the IEP is more a special education type of plan, and that is managed by the Special Education Department. Specifically on the 504s, one key component that a parent needs to be able to start the process with a school to determine eligibility for a Section 504 plan is a letter from their doctor or medical provider listing the diagnosis and the needs of this child, as well as some potential accommodations that they will be requesting. Without this letter from the medical community, it would be unlikely that a child will get considered and evaluated for a Section 504 plan. All three of my children currently have 504 plans since preschool all the way to high school. Colleges do not take 504 plans, but they do take the documentation that was from their senior year in high school, plus letters from doctors to develop accommodations in a college environment. Here's just a general listing, not all inclusive, of some accommodations that we have used in our 504 plan. I did have a child that had an IEP for, I would say, 8 years during the elementary and middle school, but those accommodations were included as part of his IEP. But right now, all three of my kids have 504s, except for my college one, who just has a list of accommodations. And just to go through some of them, of the things that our doctors supported, is things like designated support to administer tube feeds. That's really important, especially on the elementary level. Extra time for lunch and snacks. A lot of our children with PFDs just don't eat on a normal pace as other children, especially again in elementary school. Classrooms designated to be free of specific foods. These are examples of peanut-free rooms, nut-free rooms that we can see so the children can feel safe and be safe, not around their allergens. Food-free parties, other things like being able to bring food from home, and then opportunities to be able to eat during instruction, and also ensuring that personnel that works with our children have the education to administer epinephrines, or even, being able to learn how to do the tube feeds. In high school, usually a lot of those accommodations stay. Obviously, the children are more independent, so they'll be able to self-carry epinephrines, be able to do their own tube feeds. But we have expanded some accommodations also to projects. A lot of science projects involve food. And we want to ensure that children are safe and are be able to participate and get the access to education just like anybody else. As we move to college, like I said, Section 504 plans are not really part of something that a college would take, but it doesn't, just went through this as I have a freshman in college, where we did have to get a letter and the support from our doctor listing some of the things that my son needed to ensure that he was in a safe environment. And there are things like not allowing pets in the classroom, which some people have some of the emotional comfort, and some universities do allow, but not having pets in the room is a big one. The ability of asking for a single room for them, or having a double room with a dorm mate that has respect for their allergies. Also, training the resident advisor in some of things like either food allergies, tube feeds, or any, some of the instances and reactions that children with PFD would have in college. So these are just a few of the accommodations that we have included working with our university. At the end of the day, clear communication and being upfront with teachers and principals and the staff are the key. Our children can and are able to do all the activities in schools, and for the most part, as long as there's communication and we get the support from our doctors with the documentation needed to create 504 plans, then everything works great. Thank you. And now I will pass it out to Amber.
Hello, thank you, Alba. My name is Amber Maris, and I'm here to speak today about what it's like to travel with kids with PFD. So to start, I would like for you to think about your favorite vacation destination. Just close your eyes and take yourself there, and think of maybe 1 or 2 words that you feel while you're there. Just take a moment. We'd love for some of you to add that to the chat box and really be able to just settle in where you are. Think about, with those great, wonderful thoughts, what are some stressors you have when you're preparing for your vacations? Are you remembering to pack all the clothing? Are you remembering to pack the snacks for the drive? Are you remembering to pack entertainment? Making sure that confirmations are settled. Now I'd like to introduce you to my son, Jax. He is 8 years old and has Down syndrome. He is at his favorite place in this picture, the beach. This is his freedom place. This is his fun place. This is his happy place. We like to take him here once a year around his birthday if we can, just to give him some of those positive experiences. But when you talk to families with PFD, with those great, wonderful words that you came up with, we also have some very stressful feelings associated with traveling. When I spoke to some families that have children with PFD and asked them what words come to mind when they think of traveling, it was words like isolation, anxiety, fear, panic, challenging. It was all about just getting prepared for the trip. So I'm here today to talk to you and tell you how you can help us as we prepare to travel. So a quick background, Jax, we knew before he was born that he had Down syndrome, and we were prepared for cardiac issues, low muscle tone, speech delays, all the normal things that kind of come with Down syndrome. When he was born, we knew there was a little bit of a cardiac issue, but everything else seemed good. And then we found out at 8 days old that he was not feeding as we thought he was. In fact, we had our first failure to thrive diagnosis at 8 days, and that started our journey of dream feeds, timing how many hours between feeding sessions, how long it took him to eat, counting milliliters, just those stressful moments of not only having a newborn with special needs, but now a newborn that wasn't wanting to eat. Then at 4 months old, we got a second diagnosis of failure to thrive. And that is when we got Jax's NG tube. So we felt like we could breathe a little bit because he was getting his nourishment, but it started a new journey of feeding therapy, occupational therapy, medication changes, formula changes, tongue tie procedures, anything we could do to help him with this challenge that he was facing. A year and a half after Jax was born, he got a G-tube placement. And while this allowed us some flexibility with not having the tape on the face and being able to move a little bit easier, it brought different challenges. And these were more challenges dealing with emergency rooms. When Jax first got his G-tube, we had a lot of granulation. So early in our G-tube journey with him, it came out and I could not get the G-tube back in. And so we took him to Phoenix Children's Hospital and the doctors were great. But the tube had closed pretty quickly and they had to use steel rods and insert them into Jax and slowly widen the tube. This was excruciating. It was excruciating to watch. It was just a horrible experience. So the next time the G-tube came out and we weren't able to get it in, that was the first thing in my mind, is that I needed to get him somewhere quickly before that tube or that hole started closing again. I started calling emergency rooms closer to our house and nobody was able to help us. And every one of them redirected us to Phoenix Children's Hospital. We don't live too far away from Phoenix Children's Hospital, so it wasn't horrible, but it still was precious time that I felt like I was having to waste to get there to help us. This set in a new fear of, what if I'm somewhere that there's not a children's hospital nearby? I can't get him to where he needs to be before that tube closes. And Jax is 100% G-tube dependent. So this really was something that just shook me to my core. After those experiences, I halted travel for our family. And prior to Jax, we loved to travel. This was something that was really hard because in my mind, I had this statement of, well, if he can stop pulling out his G-tube, then we can travel. Or if I can get really good at putting that G-tube in, then we can travel. Or if he can eat, then we can travel. These were unrealistic. This was not fair to Jax. It was not fair to me, and it really wasn't fair to the rest of my family. So eventually we did start traveling again. And through a lot of trial and error, we learned about planning for worst case scenarios. One of our earliest trips was a road trip. I remember that he had a feeding pump and I had packed everything. We got to where we were going and I forgot the power cord to charge the pump. And it was terrifying watching that battery level go lower and lower and knowing that we were in trouble. I found a random Radio Shack, went running in, bawling, looking for power cords that had the exact adapter size for our pump. Thankfully, we were able to find something and we were fine, but it was a really scary moment. So later on, we decided we were going to fly across the country to go visit family. And this was our first time flying with Jax's formula. And we thought it'd be a good idea to ship most of it so we didn't have to worry about taking it all through the airport. And when it got to Connecticut, some of the pouches had exploded. Thank goodness we had shipped it early, so we were able to bring replacements, but it was something we hadn't anticipated. And then we got to just weekend getaways, having everything packed in a small suitcase, getting to a hotel and finding out they don't have refrigerators. So we're running back and forth in ice buckets, trying to keep his formula at a safe temperature for him to be able to take the following morning. Now I'd like to talk about how you can help families with PFD prepare for travel. If you work with a family with PFD, if you know a family with PFD, or if you're part of a family with PFD, the best way to start is just by having conversations. Ask them what their summer plans are. And then follow up with the most important question, how are you feeling? If they feel confident with traveling, they're going to let you know. But if there's any fear or anxiety or questions, they'll be happy to share those with you. So take a few moments and listen, and then offer some simple suggestions or ideas. As I was preparing this presentation, some of my Family Advisory Council members offered amazing ideas that I had never thought of. Brant had suggested a checklist that we just print out and use every time we travel to make sure we're not missing any of the important materials. There was also a suggestion of packing all of your feeding supplies, tubes, syringes, formula, all in the same bag if you're going through security, so that if they have to open the bag, they get a full glimpse of what you're traveling with and why. Looking at TSA guidelines is really important. And also, if you're able to, getting a medical letter of necessity to kind of explain why these materials are important to your child. The other thing you can do is offer reassurance. There's a good chance there could be some regression if you're gone and you're out of your normal routine for some time. Reassure the families that this is not uncommon and that there's a really, really good chance they're going to bounce back. I know we were out of town last week, and while Jax had made strides in the last month that he's never made with his feeding, and I was so excited for this trip, as soon as we got in the car, there was that fear that I was messing it all up. In my head, I knew, like logically, he would be okay, but in my heart, in my gut, in the depths of my soul, I was terrified that we would get home and he wouldn't be where he was with his progress. The last thing you can do is so simple, but it is so impactful. Giving parents and children the permission to take a break. Jax is 100% G-tube dependent. I know I will need to feed him every 3 hours on that tube. But if I can take a break from the intense feeding practice and just enjoy where we're at for a few days, it's not only really beneficial to me, it's good for him, and it's great for the rest of the family. It's a moment to reset. So now when we travel with Jax, we're better. We're still learning. He loves to go places. When we travel, it is not just packing some food for him. It's packing the appropriate number of formula pouches to make sure we have enough for the full trip, plus some extras in case there's any breakage. It's packing big syringes and little syringes for medication, extension tubes, backups for those, G-tube backup, feeding materials like if he uses certain spoons or oral motor chewies, packing our like encouragement systems. If we have toys or something like that we use to help him eat. If he's eating a certain food, we have to pack that as well. So I made my checklist and printed it out. It helped me a ton, but it also is very eye-opening just to see how much we're packing in addition to those clothes, toiletries, everyday things that we put in normal vacation trips that we can't run to the store and get. We have to come prepared with these. So I'm hoping today I was able just to give you some insight into what it's like to travel with children with PFD, and also show you how you can help us prepare and allow us the opportunity to experience moments like this. I'm now going to hand it off to Monica Davis.
Thanks, Amber. My name is Monica Davis, and I am the mother of two spunky girls. Genevieve is 10 and had IgE food allergies as an infant and toddler, but thankfully she outgrew them by age 3. Cecilia is 7 and showed signs of food allergies by 1 week old. She would later be diagnosed with IgE food allergies and chronic FPIES, or food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome. Feeding her became quite the challenge. Many kids with pediatric feeding disorder rely on special foods, formulas, and medications to provide nutrition and alleviate or prevent symptoms of their PFD. When there is a change to one or more of these necessities, it can alter the lives of the whole family, and not only during meal times. Have you ever had a product you love that was discontinued? Maybe they changed the recipe and it no longer appealed to you. For most, these are annoyances or minor inconveniences. For families dealing with a pediatric feeding disorder, these changes go beyond inconvenience. My daughter Cecilia relied on a hypoallergenic amino acid-based formula starting at age 2, when her weight declined from the 68th percentile to the 11th percentile in a matter of months. Her diet was extremely restricted due to the number of foods she could not tolerate, and it became clear we needed to get her a better source of nutrition. Around 50% of her nutrition ended up coming from this formula. She often got sick of eating the same safe foods, and it would be difficult to get her to eat at all. If she reacted to a new food, she would refuse to eat and would drink only formula for 1 or 2 days until her GI symptoms subsided. Even with the eating challenges of a restricted diet, Cecilia's weight remained steady and she continued to grow and meet all of her milestones. Just before she turned 5, we learned that the formula company was making changes to their recipe. They swapped sugar for maltodextrin derived from corn, something that she never tolerated. They also added prebiotics, something that she had issues with when she was a toddler. We decided to move ahead with the new formula to see if she would react to it, but unfortunately, we never could find out. She refused to drink it no matter how many ways we tried to get her to accept it. The flavor was so different that she even noticed when we mixed 1 ounce of the new formula with 7 ounces of her old formula. Rather than wasting more of her old formula, we decided to let her finish it off while we came up with a new plan with her GI doctor and her allergist. We first decided to retrial a formula that Cecilia reacted to at age 2. Again, she reacted. In the end, it was decided that we just have to feed her foods that were not entirely safe, since her reactions were non-life-threatening. We just had to deal with the consequences, which included behavior, skin, and GI symptoms. The moment Cecilia drank the last of her old formula, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. It had been our safety net, and now it was gone. Keeping Cecilia healthy became all-consuming. I had to spend more time planning, shopping, prepping, cooking, and trying to feed Cecilia instead of having that time for other necessary activities. My older daughter had some big emotions as she had to learn to adjust to less time with mommy. And my husband and I had to learn how to help everyone handle Cecilia's feelings of loss and behavioral reactions like hyperactivity, aggression, defiance, a lower frustration threshold, and sleeplessness that came from foods to which she was sensitive. My daughter Genevieve has some thoughts to share on how those changes affected our family.
How does Cecilia's behaviors that come from maybe her food reactions, how do those affect the whole family?
Well,
and mainly you?
For starters, they just really take time away from my family members. Like, honest, I could be like wanting to go and play with mom, like with dolls, and then she could be saying, I want something different than this dinner. I hate this dinner. Because it's her limited food choice, like chicken or beef or something like that she hates. Really, I don't get it. It takes so much away. And it affects dad and mom because mom gets stressed because she has to actually cook the food for Cecilia and she has to find ways to keep her happy. It makes such a difference in our family. But I never wish I could have a different sister. She is awesome in every way. She's funny, she's sweet, she's kind, she's caring. She's just a little picky. But aren't we all?
Shortly after we had run out of Cecilia's formula, she had a reaction to a new food and again refused to eat. She got down from the table, ran to her room, climbed on her bed, threw her blanket over her head, and sobbed harder than I've ever heard her sob before. She said, I just want my milkshake. Why do those guys have to change my milkshake? We are often more focused on products and nutrition that we forget about the feelings and emotions tied to these products. It is not just the child with PFD that experiences big emotions. The whole family is affected. I'm not alone in the challenges of feeding my child with pediatric feeding disorder or making sure they get what they need to thrive. Many families have experienced tough changes. The FDA recommended a change in connection devices for tube feeding to reduce the risk of misconnections and patient injury. These new connections had narrower openings than previous connections, which caused slower flow rates. This created difficulties for those receiving blenderized foods via a tube, especially since O-ring syringes used for this type of diet are not compatible with the new tubing. When insurance changes, families may have a wait time for supplies, and they have to fight to get coverage for supplies that had been previously covered. Their time is now consumed with making phone calls, filling out forms, sending documentation, making more phone calls, writing appeals, and jumping through the hoops necessary to get their child what he or she needs. As they wait, their child may have a reappearance of symptoms or a gap in their nutrition due to not having the necessary medications or special formulas. This may also cause financial hardships as caregivers need to take time off work to navigate changes or spend more out of pocket as they wait for coverage approval. Just recently, there was a major formula recall that not only affected those who had been using the formula, but also those using other formulas. Families now needed to find a new source of nutrition for their child, so they turned to other brands not involved in the recall. Families who'd been using these other formulas already are now struggling to receive their supply because supply just could not keep up with a greater demand. One family relayed to me the setbacks they experienced with oral eating and feeding therapy due to the switch in formulas based on what was available. Their child, who was mainly tube fed but had made great strides with oral eating, is now refusing to drink her formula and eat solid foods as she has lost trust. She no longer knows what to expect when she drinks from a cup and is losing valuable nutrition because there is no consistency with her formula. The COVID-19 pandemic brought about new challenges. Families had difficulty gaining access to products that their child was used to having. People bought out products, stocking up on allergy-friendly items their child needed, and others bought allergy-friendly items they wouldn't normally buy simply because they had no other options. The FDA provided flexibility to manufacturers that allowed them to make ingredient changes without noting these changes on the label, something that could prove dangerous to people with food allergies. There were also general supply issues as production couldn't keep up with demand. For most, not being able to buy a preferred food item is a minor frustration. For those caring for a child with a pediatric feeding disorder, not having access to safe and preferred foods, formulas, and necessary medical supplies can be life or death situation and a major cause of stress. Pediatric feeding disorders have a far greater reach than mealtime, and thankfully, there are some great resources and supports for families. The Oli Foundation and their Equipment Supply Exchange Program connect people seeking products to those donating. Feeding Matters and their Power of Two program pairs qualified family coaches who have firsthand experience with PFD with families struggling to overcome the medical, emotional, financial, educational, and social issues often faced with PFD. I am also thankful for online communities of like-minded caregivers full of wisdom, compassion, and understanding who help each other navigate a world that at times is very unfamiliar and overwhelming. And now I'm going to pass it off to Emily.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emily Adams, and I am the proud mama of Morgan. Here she is back when she was 2, right after her NG tube placement, and I remember this day very vividly. It was an impromptu visit to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to evaluate her for the intensive feeding program there. It was a very emotional day, but he's so cute with that little tube. So Morgan's feeding journey started very, very early. She was full term, wasn't a preemie or anything, but she definitely had, some latching issues and presented with reflux pretty much immediately after she was born. We had challenges finding the right reflux medication. And then once she hit about 6 months, she started to gain weight, which was lovely. We get to her 12-month checkup, and our pediatrician at the time recommended that we go ahead and take her off of her reflux meds, which was very challenging for us because the projectile vomiting continued. She created a very strong aversion to eating. Medical staff really didn't know what was going on because reflux doesn't necessarily, kids usually grow out of it, they told me. And then it was right around about 15 months when she started to lose weight again, and about 18 months was her failure to thrive diagnosis, which is really hard to hear as a parent, especially when you're working as hard as we were to make her thrive. So right around 2 years, it was July the 1st of 2019, she was in the hospital. They did place in an NG tube. Shortly thereafter, she was thankfully admitted into the Nationwide Children's Intensive Feeding Program, but we did have some insurance concerns around coverage leading up to that program. And it was very stressful for me being in the insurance industry to see how challenging it was to get the program approved, especially given Morgan's history and the knowledge that she really did need help on that behavioral piece. My husband and I did have to sign a letter of intent with the Nationwide hospital to private pay for her program if our insurer at the time was not willing to pay. So that created a little bit of extra stress for us as well. But really, historically, when it comes to PFD kids and getting the coverage that they need from their insurers, PFD lacked a universally accepted definition. It wasn't until last year where we at Feeding Matters really did a lot of advocacy and awareness efforts to ask for the CDC to create an ICD-10 code for pediatric feeding disorder, which if you are in the insurance industry, or you're a provider, that in order to have or get or obtain insurance coverage, you must have an ICD-10 code that can be billed for reimbursement. So that did happen in between like 19 and 2020, and then in 2021 the code was approved completely. So we've had some challenges along the way. I'm really grateful that it sounds like from my discussions with Nationwide that happen pretty regularly, that the ICD-10 code now being approved from last year has really improved their ability to get insurance to cover the costs of these intensive feeding programs, and at a more rapid pace, which is lovely. And, as a mom who is going through all of this with a child and really not understanding what was going on and why coverage wasn't occurring, and I found out kind of while we were inside the intensive feeding program that it was challenging because this intensive program was very multidisciplinary in its approach. And now that I look back and think about all of the different therapies that Morgan had to have over the years and any medical insurance challenges that we had along the way, it was always when there was a combined effort of therapy. So the intensive therapy that we went through in Columbus, Ohio was a combined approach, not just with speech and OT, but also pediatric dietetics. There was a pediatrician who was on staff, pediatric psychologist. There was a kitchen staff who are teaching the parents how to prepare the foods at the right textures and at the right volumes that we needed. So for an insurance company to just like rubber stamp a very large expense, it was very challenging for them, which I completely understand now. But I really just have, a plea for each of you. I mean, we're so grateful to have each of you here, whether you're a family member, whether you're a provider who works with PFD kiddos, we're so grateful to have you here. But if I could ask you one question, it's to please consider, if you have a child, like Morgan or another PFD child who just has complex issues that maybe not just you can figure out on your own, know that it is okay, and the parents or the caregivers are basically begging for someone to stop the cycle and just say, time out, like, let's figure out what we can do to kind of build a team around this child to figure out how to get them on the right trajectory. Because quite honestly, we felt, in my family, we felt like a ping pong ball in the medical community, because we were just passed from provider to provider and no one was talking to each other. And it wasn't until one of our newer GI docs stopped, took into consideration that she had more patients that day, but that she was going to be late the rest of the day, spent more time with us, with me, and gave us a better understanding of like where to go next and what to do. So we're going to go ahead and take a break and be available for any questions from the audience. So thank you so much for being here, and look forward to speaking with you.